Hello, everyone. To those of you just joining in, we're asking a question which says, what comes to your mind when you think of Indian cacao? Do click on the link in the chat and tell us what you think about Indian cacao. We're just waiting for a couple more minutes for more people to join before we start.
Start video.
All right, I think it's time for us to start. A very good evening to everyone and happy World Chocolate Day, firstly. I'm Anusha from Edible Issues, and I'll be your host for the evening. So today on World Chocolate Day, we wanted to build a deeper appreciation for chocolate by thinking about what an ethical and equitable supply chain for cacao would look like. So today we have a great lineup of speakers. We have Amrita, who will talk to us about her research and insights into the chocolate market in India. We'll be talking about what ethical cacao production looks like at a farm and factory level with Mansi, and then take a step into the kitchen where we'll hear from Sarah on conscious consumerism. I'll be getting into introductions about the speakers in a little bit, but before that, some general housekeeping rules to keep in mind. This event is being recorded and live streamed to Edible Issues YouTube. You'll be finding the video link on the chat. This session will be 1 hour long. We'll initially hear from our guests who will be speaking for 10 minutes each, and then we'll proceed to take questions from the chat. Some of you have also keyed in questions while you registered for the event. So we'll be taking questions towards the end, but at any point, if you want to have conversations with others in the audience, the chat is the place to be at. Please keep yourself on mute for the initial part of the conversation. This just helps us listen to the stories of the speakers much better. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the chat. So moving on to a little bit about each of us who are making this event happen today. So firstly, there's us, there's Edible Issues. Edible Issues is a collective by Anusha, me, and Elizabeth. It's a collective that focuses on the Indian food system. We like to have conversations and bring more light to some of the issues that haunt the Indian food system. Often we mistake eating as an independent act, but eating is anything but that, especially in a country like India, where an array of forces shape what we eat. Eating is a religious, a political, a social, an economical act, and much more than anything but an independent act. So we look at Indian food from all of these different lenses and bring some of these conversations to the forefront when we think about Indian food. So moving on to something about our speakers. Our first speaker for today is Amrita Amesur. Amrita is a corporate lawyer and is deeply passionate about food. She has spent the last year dedicatedly scribing, studying, and documenting all of her family's food experiences while learning to develop her own voice as a cook and a writer. Her essays on food and culture have been featured on Whetstone, on Goya Journal, Huffington Post, and Wine Enthusiast, amongst others. The next speaker who will be joining us after Amrita is Mansi Reddy. Mansi Reddy heads brands and partnerships at Mason & Co. Her professional path started in development, where she worked with education-based not-for-profits and consulting for social enterprises. And this was followed by a few years in advertising and a master's in media and development studies. And Mansi's love for food and her interest in food politics led to this unique role that she leads at Mason & Co. And about the next person that we have is Sarah Edwards. Sarah is the founder and chef at Copper and Cloves. Copper and Cloves is a hub and resource to get everyone excited about eating more plants and help people to learn to cook beautiful, delicious food using local and sustainable ingredients. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're expecting like a lot of interesting conversations around Indian cacao. And at any point, if anyone has a question, please do feel free to drop them in the chat before. So let's move on to the first topic for today, which is what does celebrating Indian cacao even mean? I'm going to pass on to Amrita, who's going to be talking to us about celebrating Indian cacao. Over to you, Amrita.
Hi, everyone. So why I'm here is because I've really spent the last 6 or 7 months researching and writing this piece for Whetstone and Diaspora. And in this sort of journey, I ended up uncovering so many different perspectives from across the country, from across the world, really. But more importantly, because I was focusing on the Indian market, I wanted to speak to the Indian chocolatiers. I wanted to speak to the Indian chocolate farmers, and very importantly, also to Indian bakers, who are the ultimate sort of consumers of large amounts of cocoa. And I wanted to understand from them why is it that they're not really using Indian cacao, and why is it that there is this sort of fixation surrounding Belgian chocolate. What actually got me started on this debate was that I was noting that a lot of the conversation in chocolate and amongst the Indian bakers was them differentiating themselves, talking about compound chocolate and couverture chocolate. So the entire debate was that, oh, we only use couverture chocolate. We do not use compound chocolate. We wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I found the debate to be rather hollow and terribly uninteresting, and really not what we should be discussing, frankly, when we're talking about chocolate. Now, from my perspective, if you're able to afford Belgian chocolate, then you're definitely able to afford anything that grows in India, and which is far superior than any product that comes from Belgium. Going further into this, mostly because Belgian chocolate is entirely too problematic, the history surrounding it, the colonization that it came with, the current issues that it still lives with in terms of how that cacao happens to come to Belgium to get processed, is something that I wanted to highlight and help bring to light, which is why I wrote this piece in the first place. And Diaspora wanted me to sort of check the entire history of how cacao happened to come to India and how it is being dealt with today, and what is the perception of Indian cacao in India today. So having spoken to a lot of the chocolatiers, having spoken to a lot of the bakers, what I found was most of the bakers actually did not even want to speak to me. They kept dodging the questions that I had for them because they were difficult questions to answer, because it would involve them having to look in the mirror and wonder really why is it that they were exoticizing something that simply comes from Belgium purely with the Belgium tag, and why they didn't want to dig a little further into understanding where that Belgian chocolate actually comes from. It comes from enslaved labor. It comes from Africa. 70% of the world's chocolate comes from Africa. And all of that goes towards enriching European countries. It goes towards enriching the Calibers and the Valronas and whatnot. And so that conversation is something I found extremely difficult to have with all of the bakers. They mostly just did not want to be associated with a conversation like that. And that I'm beginning to understand much later, because it seems that the big chocolate of Belgium, has been planting itself in Bangalore and in other places, unloading about 1,000 kilos of chocolate into all of the baking schools, and really ensuring that all of the students, therefore, that come out of those baking schools are indoctrinated in this specific version of, oh, you can only use this chocolate and you may only use it at this temperature and you can use it for 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Do not even bother with any other kind of chocolate. This is the best of the best. This is the only one that will work for you. This works with your hands and with the body temperature and whatnot. And they get you on all of the technicalities. They make you so afraid to even work with any other chocolate in the world. So the indoctrination and the learning is set very deep amongst the Indian bakers, is what I have found. And on the other hand, there's another problematic discussion that was happening amongst the bakers. When I inquired about why is it that they weren't using Indian chocolate when it's quite readily available, when India is a huge manufacturer of cacao itself. The fact that nobody even knows that there is that much chocolate coming in from India. What they said is, oh, we don't get 1,000 free kilos from Mason, and we don't get 1,000 free kilos from all things, which is why we can't really test it out and we can't really, market it ourselves, as opposed to the Belgian big chocolate, which sends us all of this free chocolate. What I wanted to point out to these bakers was that is not really the point. The point is such that it is not given for free. The point is because the Masons of the world are actually paying the farmers at the bottom and ensuring that the process of the chocolate making is such that it does not underpay anybody, that it does not give free things away, and therefore it is not going to be free. It rather should be more expensive and more cherished in that regard. And the expectation that there is going to be 1,000 kilos of free chocolate unloaded, what you must also know about that is that 1,000 kilos is not free. It's being paid for by slave labor. It's being paid for by people who are not getting paid. It's being paid for off the back of labor, which the big chocolate of Belgium is not performing. So it's been underwritten by all of that. So whilst everybody is very offended about this whole Belgian chocolate business, that is really what I wanted to highlight, the sort of hypocrisy of all of this. And I think that's really important to me to have highlighted here. I think, do we have any more time, Elizabeth, Anusha?
Yeah. We do have 5 minutes. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so having spoken to some of the bakers and some of the chocolatiers in India, what I'm gathering from Mansi and from Mason and from All Things and from Chocolate is that there is more than enough chocolate in India to feed all of these demands. It's not as though we don't have our own couverture chocolate. It's not as though we can't match the prices. One of the chocolate makers even told me that what they did was really track down the reasons why all of these bakers are refusing to use their chocolate, the ones that is made in India, which actually does not have any additives, which actually does not have any lecithin or vanilla or any preservatives for that matter. Mason & Co. does not even have anything which is dairy based. So it's genuinely pure chocolate. Why is it that you're not using it? Is it the price point? Is it the flavor profile? What is it? Or is it the name itself? Is it the brand value? Is it lacking? What is it? They happen to do all these blind taste tests saying that, why don't you make 3 sets of brownies, put our chocolate in one of them and just tell us, what do you like? Which one do you prefer? Is it good enough for you? Obviously, they passed the taste test. Obviously, they passed also the price test. It's priced exactly the same as the big Belgian chocolate. So what is really holding you up? What are the barriers which are holding you back from committing your time and energy and resources, which are frankly available to you because you are Mrs. Premium Baker? If you are premium and if you are projecting yourself as a premium baker and if you are charging X amount of money for things, I would rather that you patronize something which is valuable, something that has not underwritten slavery, at least blatant slavery and bad news of colonization, which frankly they should know about as chocolate makers and as cake bakers. To my mind, this history and the understanding culturally of the ingredients that you work with is very important. So that is another huge issue that I came across. Whilst writing this piece, yes, we discussed a lot about the history of how Indian chocolate has come to be. And whilst if you guys have read the piece, in fact, I discussed how Campo and Mondelez sort of created this oligopoly system in South India, where what they were actually trying to do was really buy out all of the cacao from all of the smaller farmers, ensuring that nobody goes out of pocket, and ensuring that, whoever has grown whatever is getting purchased and getting used at some point. But instead, what has actually happened over the last 20, 30 years is that they've created this sort of oligopolistic economy where there is no incentive for a farmer to make a superior product whatsoever. And so whilst it was trying to stabilize the market, it's also therefore brought down the quality of the cacao because of that. So that in itself is something I think that should be discussed, that should get highlighted. I'm not going to call it a good or a bad thing because I know it's done good things for farmers. But I also know that on the overall, we're not really going to get anywhere with this whole Belgian chocolate business and push it out of our country and for people to really commit to it so long as there is bad quality chocolate floating around in the country. So I think really that's where we're at. And we can take some questions, can't we?
Yeah,
Or
sure. But before that, I'd love to know, how did your perspectives on Indian cacao, change as you really started digging deeper into your research? What were your thoughts initially, and like how did that really change as you progressed?
Right. So I do think there's a binary, Anusha. So there is the absolute fancy level chocolate, which I would call Mason, and then there is the dairy milks of the world, right? And you can't say one or the other is any better. Yes, of course, qualitatively Mason would be better. But in terms of the demographic, what I was also trying to tell Mansi the other day is that chocolate is not really a democratized commodity right now, not in the form that it stands in the Masons and the all things and the craft chocolate world, right? So it's not everybody that can really afford the 300 rupee bar of chocolate. So we need to sort of set some perspective from that lens and not really expect that a 300 rupee bar of chocolate is going to get democratized. People are not necessarily going to adopt it and buy it. And this discussion that we're having, the one that I had prior to this, is obviously squarely lying in the privileged bracket of people where people can already afford Belgian chocolate and therefore must make the switch over to the Indian version and try and work with it. Because it's just simply gotten a bad name purely. I think it's really a lot of indoctrination is what Sarah was also telling me because she works with this chocolate. She said that it's really in the mind and there are all these preconceived notions surrounding, the chocolate is going to split and it has all these temperature issues and it differs with season and it varies and all of that. And so, it's not consistent enough for us to do. I think it's really on the skill of the chef to work with it. And I think it's really worth trying. So yes, there is that binary. Yes, the expectation cannot be that, the world of chocolate can really be saved. It can't be saved because there is just, the population is too much for it to ever come across to this demographic where they're only going to buy craft chocolate. There's always going to be a market for the dairy milks. But where the market of luxury chocolate is concerned, I really don't see any reason for anybody to be buying enslaved chocolate. And that's where I'll end it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Amrita. We have some of the questions that have come towards you, but we'll be taking it at the end after all the speakers are done. So next, I'll be passing on to Mansi, who will be talking to us about celebrating cacao on the farm and in the factory. Over to you, Mansi.
Thanks, Anusha. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. I'm so happy to have this conversation on World Chocolate Day. It is my favorite day. I just want to say that the main issue with European or imported chocolate is the supply chain. And that's the first thing that I want to talk about that what we do differently at Mason & Co. is that we try to keep that supply chain as short and as direct as possible. So we either buy directly from the farmer or we buy directly through a co-op. And that's usually because the farmers are a smaller scale and can't really process their cacao to the level that we need it to be. So the main sort of crux I want you to take away from this is that chocolate is a luxury product. It comes from a very sort of complicated, delicate, challenging environment. You can't just grow chocolate anywhere and everywhere. It only grows 2 and 3 degrees above and below the equator. So it grows in the global south, in the center of the earth. But we always associate it with a European national country. So it's actually a completely it's not a European thing. It's not a European ingredient. It's very much a South American, an Asian, and an African, currently mostly an African ingredient. It needs a hot, humid, tropical shaded environment, need constant pruning. Trees also, they need to sort of be kept shorter. Some of the issues that we've seen come up with the African cacao is one, it comes out of a lot of deforestation. There's no sort of control over this. A lot of monocropping as well, which is not the best way to grow cacao. You need permaculture, you need an ecological balance, you need these tiny midges to sort of thrive, to pollinate the flowers, to actually turn into pods, to turn into cacao. So that's why we at Mason & Co. choose one, organic certified cacao and Indian origin cacao. So if you're an organic certified farmer or farm, it's more likely for you to be able to have this ecological ecosystem of midges to pollinate the cacao flowers. The cacao tree needs the midges more than the midges need the cacao. It's a tiny little flower, barely has any smell. There's only one particular kind of fly that can pollinate it. And it's also self-incompatible. So you need to have diversity. You need to have various types of species of cacao for your plants to actually be pollinated. Otherwise, you're going down this route of monocropping, probably enslaving labor, using a lot of doing manual pollination, which takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy. And it's also led to a lot of issues with child trafficking. And that's something that basically most of your chocolate, your European chocolate, you're behind it. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to sort of disrupt this system. It's really, really uncommon for chocolate to it's really uncommon for chocolate to be made in the country of origin. So it's quite amazing to make Indian origin chocolate of this quality in India. It's come out of years and years of working with cacao farmers in India to actually process, to ferment, to dry the way that we want chocolate to actually dry. It makes a huge difference to the flavor of the chocolate. So the issues with commodity cacao, we try to kind of tackle them at every single stage, right from the farm, right from how they've been grown, how they've been processed, how they've been shipped, and once they get to us. Fair trade is one of the ways to sort of try to make this equitable, but it's really not the best way. Fair trade sort of suits more monocropped crops like banana and things like that around the world, but not something as delicate and as specialty as chocolate, as cacao. So which is why we call ourselves a farmer direct company. We make specialty cacao, which is a lot more expensive, way above the fair trade requirement. And basically, we want the value creation to stay within the country that's actually growing the raw ingredient. That's the main issue with commodity cacao, with the way that the supply chain is going. So that's why we choose organic. That's why we choose to be a farmer direct company and to use Indian origin cacao. So for us, there's another thing I'd like to kind of bring up is also the word artisanal. It gets thrown around a lot by various chocolate makers. For us, the word artisanal basically means that there's a person making this. And our thinking is that, okay, if a person can do a particular task, a person is going to, unless we can avoid it. Unless we can avoid a machine to as much as possible. We have an all-female factory. It's all ladies from surrounding villages. Again, this is not something that we get a gold medal for. It's not something that we do, that we go out of our way to do. They're genuinely the best people for the job. And all of these choices are sort of obvious to us at Mason & Co. They're just the only way to really make a good quality chocolate. And I just want to sort of bring up the processes, the farm level intricacies, everything along the way. All of these choices that we're making are to make sure that the chocolate is one, really great quality and really, really tasty, and also comparable to, and I would say better, than an imported dark chocolate. And it's really nice to sort of have these conversations and try to understand how people feel about this and how to kind of understand the thinking behind choosing something versus another. We make 3-ingredient chocolate. It has very little sugar. It doesn't have any dairy. It doesn't have any emulsifiers, any kind of unnatural ingredient. This allows you to also access some of the health benefits of cacao, which is there's flavonols, which help you kind of deal with cholesterol issues. They're really good for your heart. There's anandamines, which is kind of like caffeine, and it perks you up and it makes you happy and kind of gives you a little bit of an energy boost. And if you can get all of these properties with a little bit of sugar versus, a lot of sugar, it's still, that's essentially why it's a luxury product, because it does have a lot that it can give you. It's completely different from a 10 rupee piece of chocolate on the street. So that's not the market I'm trying to talk to. I'm trying to talk to the luxury market, everyone that wants that European or Belgian or Swiss chocolate in their fridge. Why not pick something that's actually much, much, much better in quality and has a much more interesting and ethical story behind it? And as a company like Mason & Co., it's something that we feel really, really strongly about. And I personally, I'm really happy to see 73 people joining in today. So that's really encouraging. Do we have some time for some questions?
Yeah, I think we do. So let me pull up one of the questions that came in through the registrations. Also making people understand about the ethics that goes behind specialty chocolate is something that involves a lot of education. So how much does the process of education, how much does taking the consumer through this entire process actually affect the sales? How much does the marketing come into it?
Sure. My only marketing goal is education. That's honestly the only marketing goal I have. It's why the words single origin, vegan, bean to bar are on the front of our chocolate boxes. It's why we have information like storing dark chocolate. Biting dark chocolate leads to bitterness. Let it melt in your mouth, and you won't experience that bitter aftertaste. Store this in the fridge. Eat it at room temperature. You should never eat chocolate cold. We're trying our best to sort of get people to do that. We also do factory tours. We do tasting. So all of my marketing budget goes towards trying to work with partners that also understand this, like Sarah, and also get people into my actual factory, get people into the actual tastings, come to a talk like this, where you can actually kind of see someone talking about this and why it's important. Because I fully believe everyone should really enjoy everything they eat, especially chocolate. Chocolate is super fascinating. It's got so many things about it. I learn something new about it every single day. And if I can get anyone to kind of understand what I'm trying to say, I know that they're locked in for life. I only get recurring customers and they actually kind of become really, really attached to the chocolate. So it's super encouraging when that happens. And I'm going to keep going with how that, yeah.
Great. So what exactly makes Indian cacao special? And this is also something I'm curious to know, that how much of what is available locally actually plays a role in how cacao is made and manufactured into bean. I remember reading this article that talks about how the idli grinder is actually a very important part in how chocolate is made. And then in fact, countries like Belgium end up importing grinders from India for making their chocolates.
They're all from this one guy in Coimbatore.
Right.
I would say in terms of, for us at Mason & Co, it's really, really, really important to keep things as local and as sort of available. India has so much to offer. It has everything. It's a tropical country with so many with such a wider variety of flora and fauna, but in this case, just flora. And I don't see why we need to sort of put in an ingredient that's not locally available. All our sugar comes from an organic, unrefined sugar processor. All our sea salt and the sea salt bar just comes from 35 kilometers away from the Maracana, the salt flats. We work with mainly partners in Kerala and Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, so all southern states. And we try our best not to have to import anything. We try our best to sort of keep things as locally as possible. And I would say your regular chocolate on the street, as long as it doesn't say it's from another country, it's most likely made in India. It's most likely made through a commercial processing. It's used commodity cacao, but it is probably also Indian origin cacao. It's just processed differently, grown differently, fermented differently, made into chocolate very, very differently with very different ingredients and different sort of choices made along the way.
Great. Thank you so much for shining some light on that as well.
Sure.
I think we'll take the other questions that are coming from Mansi towards the end. But now I'd love to pass on to Sarah. Sarah is going to be talking about how they celebrate cacao in the kitchen, which is also a very important conversation for us to have. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, everyone. No, thank you so much. Like Mansi said, it's just crazy that there's so many people joining in this conversation. So I'm Sarah. I am the founder of Copper and Clothes, and I've been running like a food blog and doing food consultancy and menu development over the last few years. As you may be able to tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, and I moved here just over 5 years ago, and I started the kind of food business about 3.5 years ago. And then we opened a cafe for the first time just under a year ago, the Copper and Clothes Cafe. And that was when my partnership with Mason & Co really deepened. So as a food blogger and recipe developer, I had kind of discovered Mason & Co. So the reason I started Copper and Clothes and a blog was basically to bring the style of food that I love cooking from, the Middle East, the UK, all over the world, but like celebrating Indian ingredients, so not using imported ingredients. And that's how I kind of found very, very quickly Mason & Co. as one of the only brands that I was able to find who were doing cacao powder, which I loved using, and chocolate. And we formed a partnership pretty quickly, just completely organically, because I started, I was introduced to their products. I started being able to find them. And I was just, to me, it never occurred to me, actually, that the product was substandard. I think the fact is I'm a food blogger, I'm a restaurateur now and a chef, but I haven't been to baking school. So perhaps my lack of exposure to some of the ways that culinary schools influence people's thinking into perhaps slightly less conscious, mindful thinking. I was lucky, and my lack of expertise perhaps was actually did me a favor in terms of every single ingredient. I don't come with a preconceived idea about what it should be. And I kind of, when Amrita was talking, I feel that there is, there's a parallel to draw with, medical school, where doctors are told by, they're taught by and given drugs by pharmaceutical companies. And then those are the ones that they obviously then are very quick to prescribe. And in a similar way, it seems, and I'm not trying to make it too serious, but I do think that is what's happening, because they can see that then all of these Indian bakers are going to go out and feel completely loyal and also be indoctrinated. So luckily I didn't have any of that, and until I read Amrita's article, I hadn't really thought about it. So it was super interesting to think about that. And on the price point, like you said, anyway, it's comparable to imported Belgian chocolate. And perhaps, again, my lack of business acumen and an MBA didn't, when I set up my business, I also wasn't like, okay, I need to like have the lowest input so that I can maximize my profits. Again, it didn't really occur to me. As I've said many times, when I opened the cafe, it was a complete no-brainer for me, because the cafe is a farm-to-table cafe, it's organic, and it's all about celebrating Indian ingredients, albeit cooking it in a different way. And therefore, Mason & Co. Have been from the beginning the chocolate, cacao nibs, cacao shells. We make cacao cold brew with, we basically, I think, use the full range of their products. And honestly, I've never experienced the so-called, issues with Indian cacao. I think, when the word amateur or like substandard, subpar comes up, it just doesn't resonate with me at all in terms of using the chocolate in the kitchen. Like Mansi, my marketing approach is to talk about nutritional value, to talk about celebrating colors and flavors, and crucially celebrating provenance and origin of all of the ingredients that we use in the menu. And that's our way of marketing. And that's obviously made it very easy, because with Mason & Co, I feel very confident that I am educating people about a truly good product. And just to say, I was lucky enough to visit Oroville in March of this year, because we've also collaborated on a chocolate bar, and the factory tour was honestly amazing. As has already been said, the word artisanal, the branding, the greenwashing around certain things is very prevalent, but I saw firsthand that that's not the case in the case of Mason & Co, because I saw the processes being done by hand. I saw the very skilled, all-female, very knowledgeable staff. I saw the care that went into the grading and the sourcing, and we had lots of conversations about that. So it just made me even clearer that it's a no-brainer, and it makes perfect sense that I would source my chocolate from, and my cacao from, a company with that kind of values. And for me, like, my purpose, like my vision of what I'm trying to do is to change people's perspectives. I mean, we do the same with like avocados. Avocado toast is like one of our best-selling things on the menu, and we don't use imported avocados, and we're really proud about that. And we get the same kind of thing. People say, oh, but aren't those Hass avocados, aren't they the best? In the same way that they'll say things like, oh, isn't Swiss and Belgian chocolate the best? I don't think that that's true when you really are looking at when you're looking at it as a whole, and the quality is equally as good, if not better. And certainly like has been said many times, the crucial thing is knowing that you're adding value within the country of origin, and that you're celebrating something which is a part of the flora in the country that you live in. So I'm really happy to, like, I mean, I can take you through the products. Like, we have brownies, we have chocolate chip banana bread, we have chocolate chip cookies, we have cacao smoothies, and we actually use Mason & Co in like 10 more than 10 items on our menu, and our menu's not that big. It's like less than 40 items, so it's quite a high proportion. I'm a chocolate lover, and we only get positive feedback. So I guess my plug is just for everyone to really consider that it is in the mind, that we have been and we were all prey to it. I was as well growing up. The Swiss chocolate, Belgian chocolate is just thrown around, and I absolutely fell prey to it. And I'm just glad that in my in my kind of journey of discovery, when I moved to India to find Indian ingredients and celebrate them, I found that chocolate was exactly the same as I suspected with lots of other things, which is high quality and beautiful things are happening here, and it's not a substandard or a subpar product, and so I'm same with, I've had the same discoveries with coffee, like with avocado, with chocolate. These aren't things that I knew before I moved here, but I'm certainly now on a mission. So we proudly say at Copper and Close that none of our ingredients are imported. So the opposite of actually what a lot of restaurants use to advertise their exclusivity, or their to try and make them seem more high-end, premium, or prestigious, like, oh, we use only imported this, we use only imported that. So yeah, I'm super happy that I'm able to partner with company like Mason and Co, and that I got to see firsthand the authenticity of it, but also that Amrita is doing such an amazing job of like spotlighting this issue. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that, and I think it's absolutely important that we reclaim the narrative about Indian cacao, and take it into our own hands, and tell the world more about how amazing Indian cacao is. I think going off of that, we have one question that I would really love to ask Amrita. This is a question from Kashmira, which is about what tips do you have for people, or what do you have to tell to people who would like to break into writing about more niche food topics like cacao or coffee in the Indian setting?
A question on writing, how interesting. It's just genuinely for me, I feel like now I've written on way too many commodities, and I did not realize that until I was on my third or fourth. I've written on oil, and then I've written on coconuts, and then it seems to feed on itself. And what I'm seeing is what's happened to me is that I've noticed all of these cash crops, mostly all these cash crops growing in the global south, and I find that they've been exploited in the manner of colonization and the way it's been used. That is really what intrigued me so heavily, and which is what got me into this discussion, and which is what got me really digging around. And if there is a commodity that you are interested in, and if there is a commodity that you want to really walk into, mostly I would suggest is just taking a deep dive into it, understanding your research, understanding from people around you what is it that does happen with all of these resources when you start using them, and then start putting it down, start discussing it in your own head. That is really, frankly, what I would do. Why is it that some people react a certain way to these ingredients, and why is it that some other people react another way? So really, it's that investigative bent which has got me going on all of these things. Because it's mostly because I was curious as to why there was all of this behavioral impact across different parts of the world with different ingredients. For instance, coconut, it's just like entirely taken off in the US. Everything, now suddenly they want to use coconut oil for everything. They want to put it in chocolate. They want to put it in food. They want to use ghee for everything. They want to, use avocado toasts everywhere. What they're not realizing is that the enlarged production of all of these elements, of all of these commodities, going from one end of the world to the other, is causing more harm than good. You're not really eating what's in your vicinity. You're not feeding the local soil. You're not eating what is in your terroir. And in a sense, you're not doing good for yourself, nor are you doing good for the environment. So it's just on the overall, for me, an entire complete fail, because all that's going to do is create a monocrop culture. And so now I'm starting to sound like a broken record, I find. I feel like all of my pieces are starting to sound exactly the same. I'm discussing monocrop, I'm discussing problematic colonization, and it's really mostly the same that's happening across for all of these commodities. And then the common thread linking them all is colonization. The common thread linking them all is also being all part of the global south. The exploitation of resources of the global south to fuel the global north. That's really where I would end it. And it's really the investigation of it which got me started on it. So hopefully does that answer the question?
I hope it does for Kashmira. But yeah, thank you so much for like leading this movement and being a broken record for us. Mansi, my next question is to you, Mansi, about Indian cacao farming, and also so one of the questions that has come up is that farmers refer to the owners of the land. So how do we ensure that proceeds raised to the workers are actually channeled correctly towards them? So how do you also make sure that whatever comes goes back as well to the workers and the farmers?
So for us, there's a few ways to sort of do this. One, of course, it's specialty cacao. We don't buy anything off the commodities market. We're not going off of commodity rates. The other is that we found is if they're organic certified, this adds like a layer of traceability and also allows farmers to demand more because they're organic certified. But that's really not the only solution. You have to, as a producer, take an interest in your suppliers. You have to take an interest, you have to know them. You have to actually see who they are, understand what's happening at every stage. And that's the only real way to know that no one's being exploited. And so it's a combination of having that transparency, caring about this, wanting to do that, like actually go to your producers and see what's happening. And two, trying to use some sort of institutional sort of guidelines for it, which is in our case, organic certification, and also being a farmer direct company, which means we're trying to, again, it's one of the things that really, if we didn't do this, we wouldn't be able to make good quality chocolate. If we didn't have a relationship with our farmers, we wouldn't be able to, or our co-ops, we wouldn't be able to have a good quality raw ingredient. So it's not something special to us. It's not something that's different. It's really just one of the most basic parts of being a quality specialty food producer, is to know where your raw ingredient is coming from. And in our case, the organic certification is one of the ways to do that as well, on top of getting to know that and keeping that supply chain short, not having too many people sort of exchange hands, as few as possible, is at least how it's worked out for us at Mason & Co.
Mm-hmm. And on this note, when we're talking about cacao production, I think one of the questions that I also saw on the chat from Kumud was around how does this intergenerational knowledge transfer take place in cacao production? How has like the previous generations done it, and how is this shaping the future of how Indian cacao is grown?
Honestly, as a bean to bar chocolate maker, we've only been doing this since 2011, 2012. So I wouldn't say it's really super new. And I would also say specialty cacao processing, when Jane and Fabian, the founders of Mason & Co. started, they had a really hard time finding farmers that would actually do the processing the way that we wanted to. The fermentation process is very delicate. It takes 3 to 5 days. It depends on the temperature. It depends on so many things. And it should be something that's intergenerational, but I haven't seen that yet, because specialty cultivation and processing is super new. It's not even 10 years old, because we've only been doing this for about 8 years. So I don't know. I would love to
just to add to that, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of intergenerational, I think what we must look back now is to see that in India, especially where cacao is concerned, since the production of it, actual sort of agricultural production of it, started only in the 70s, is really only in Kerala amongst the co-ops that they really had that intergenerational transfer of knowledge, with the Kerala University, the Agricultural University, and therefore the farmers surrounding that. So it's really Campco, the Kerala University, all of that. So with the help of Cadbury, with the help of World Bank, all of that is what created what remains today as part of the cacao production. As Mansi said, obviously the specialty cacao is going to be a completely different leg of things, whereas that was more commodity production. This is far finer process. So I think this is where it will begin to sort of create an intergenerational value, I would say.
Yep. Yeah, it didn't really exist before we started this movement. So it's really nice to see other companies doing this, other chocolate companies doing bean to bar chocolate with Indian origin beans. It shows that something's working, that this movement is happening, and it's encouraging to see that.
Thank you so much for that, Mansi. Amrita, one of the questions that has also come up since we, initially spoke about some of the practices by Mondelez, Nestle, etc. So, what are some of the other practices that you've seen or observed in your research that neglects India and its position in terms of cacao manufacturing?
Sorry, what?
That neglects India in terms of cacao and cacao that's produced in India.
Yeah, so I think this insight I've gotten from Mansi herself. So I'll elaborate, because I remember it really well. I spoke to Mansi for several hours on these topics. So what Mansi said is that where Indian commodity chocolate is different from craft chocolate, and therefore is different from the African chocolate, and therefore different from the Belgian chocolate that comes in, is genuinely the process. It is not the quality of the beans. It is not anything else. It's simply that the same bean is processed differently for a Cadbury or for a Campo as opposed to Mason. So you can literally go to the same farm, assuming that's all organic and whatever, even if it's all organic. It's really the process is the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fermentation, the moment the pod is taken off the tree. to how it is fermented, how it is processed, at what point is it processed, how is it fermented, for how long is it fermented, how long is it roasted, is what develops the actual flavor profile. Now, other than the Masons of the world, nobody is really making this sort of effort. Because frankly, it is a lot of effort to create a certain flavor profile in chocolate. And that much amount of care can only ever go into craft chocolate. And having said that, I'm not even going to say that the Belgian big chocolate is making that kind of effort, because what they're doing is really adding in a lot of the cacao butter back into the chocolate. They're adding in vanilla, they're adding in sugar. And therefore, it is such a standardized product. And therefore, it is so heavily adopted because bakers don't want to experiment. Bakers don't want any sort of unpredictability with chocolate, because chocolate itself is a very difficult ingredient to work with. Tempering it is a skill in itself. It would take years to master. And so once you arrive at that level of skill, you don't really want to walk away from, okay, it melts at this temperature and it solidifies at that temperature. You don't really want to walk away from that sort of predictability and safety, is what I've gathered from the chefs. So the only difference between the fine chocolate and the not so fine chocolate is the process that it undergoes. Yeah. If you're keeping only 10% of cacao, or you're keeping 60 to 70% of cacao, that would make the price difference, and that would make also the qualitative difference in terms of how it is processed and how much cacao is kept back along with the cacao butter, which would make it rich, as opposed to the cheap compound chocolate, which I don't use cheap compound chocolate, I only use Couverture chocolate from Belgium. That is the elitist narrative, which frankly I'm really sick of, and I would really love for bakers to stop talking about that. So I think that should answer the question.
Absolutely. And in your research, Amrita or Mansi, have you come across anyone who's researching and mapping actually the genetics of Indian cacao?
No. It's actually really hard to determine it. Like I said, it's self-incompatible. You need to have various species of cacao in one plantation or in one farm, and they all sort of cross-pollinate. That's the only way to really turn it into pods. So looking at the genetics of cacao, I think it's actually a little bit of a myth that there's 3 types or 2 types, like a Trinitario or a Criollo. It's really hard to tell. I think in Trinidad, there are a few research institutes that are doing this and that are able to sort of control how this is happening. But I know that it's impossible to have a plantation with one particular species and actually be able to tell that, because by the time that it's making pods, like the trees are actually growing pods, it's no longer what you thought it was a couple harvests ago or 2 farms over. So it's I don't know how to kind of get that in. And also I have a book that you guys can also check out that talks about this. It's called Red Wine Chocolate. We call it the Mason & Co. Bible. And Simran Sethi is the author of this book, and she has a lot of knowledge about so many amazing foods that are basically dying out because of 1, the commercialization, and 2, colonization of food. And it does throw light on species, and also looking at the genetics of cacao. It's quite difficult to actually tell this. There should be technically millions of species, kind of like how you look at grapes and you see the terroir grapes and having all of those flavor notes. There's just so much intermingling that it's kind of hard to determine as of what I've read so far.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mansi. So one of the other questions that will also come up here that I also love to ask Sarah is, are there any ways in which people are actually incorporating cacao in local cuisines? Like, have you, in your research, come across anyone who's trying and tweaking and innovating with cacao in Indian food?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've definitely in bakers, like the more I've got to know the community, the more I've found that people are starting to think about this. But yeah, in terms of local cuisine, I'm just trying to think about it, whether there's any incorporation of cacao, because as an ingredient, it's so rich. If you know anything about Mexican cuisine, it's incorporated into savory dishes. Mm-hmm. It can be used to make something rich and dark and unctuous, which is the beautiful property of cacao. In terms, like I'm not as kind of clued into whether that's happening in kind of local cuisines, but I definitely would say that it could be. It could definitely be used for example, in Indian sweets to give a chocolate flavor. But like I said, in Mexican cuisine, where it's there's a sauce called a mole, which is basically just like a generic kind of everyone has their own version in different households. And I imagine that as a marinade, obviously I'm completely plant-based, but as a marinade, whether it's meat or whether it's to make a curry sauce, which incorporated that to bring that kind of depth of flavor, so it could definitely be used in that way.
Thank you so much. I think one of my favorite examples that I've seen locally is like in one of those dosa carts where they use in the 100 variety dosas, they actually use chocolate dosa. I don't know what it tastes like, but yeah, that'll be interesting to try.
A couple of years ago, Saraswati, our factory manager and our longest employee, she made a chocolate idli for World Idli Day for us, and that recipe is up on our website. So if you'd like to make chocolate idlis, it's there on the Mason.
Perfect.
That's awesome.
Thank you. I think we're also running really short on time, but I would really love to ask this one last question before we wrap up for the day, which is, Mansi, to you, does seeing the final product and tasting it influence the way the farmers participate in the process? And how does that influence a sustainable supply chain when the product comes, a full circle?
I've only met one farmer that I've actually given the chocolate to. And there's also another female farmer, a farmer who happens to be a woman, also who's enjoyed it. And we do have a good, actually, I'm gonna just check if our processor, Ellen, is here. Maybe she can throw some light on this. Ellen, are you here? Do you want to tell us how, if any of the farmers or processors have tried our chocolate and what do they think of it? Would you? This is our partner in Kerala, and she's currently in Belgium, and she helps us process. She's part of the co-op Go Ground, and she's wonderful. Ellen, do you have anything to add to that in terms of farmers and how they feel about chocolate, our chocolate?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I can say that farmers are really proud when they get to taste the chocolate, I have to say. So I think on the visit when you came, Mansi, then we also were able to give a few bars, and also even to the staff that is working there. So who is actually working with the beans in the fermentation and drying units. And it's for them, it's really nice because it gives them an idea what actually is the end result of working with this cacao, and what is also that they're doing a meaningful job. I think with the farmers, they love it a lot that there's also attention for them. When we have chocolate makers coming over, we go with them to the farmers and they love it. The attention, they see that somebody is doing something exactly with their beans, and they also try to understand what it is. The same thing when they come to the unit and they see how the beans are processed. That's all the same thing. Our philosophy is definitely to get everybody of the chain involved, and we really, really support all transparency in that. So I think that is also why we work together at Mason & Co, and that goes also so well, that we share that same philosophy. And yes, I think it's definitely important that they try chocolate and they also get a taste of it. I mean, for the workers at our place, when we are trying to make like test batches to see how the flavor profile comes out after we do a test, they always get to try it. And you can see from the beginning, they were maybe doing a face like, maybe a bit too bitter or too much. But after years, they also, the palate changed. They appreciate it so much more that it's a nice dark chocolate, while they were used to eating some sweet bar. So, and we also really happy that we actually could educate them a little bit on that level. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks for joining.
Welcome.
Thanks so much, Ellen. So I think we're almost towards the end of the conversation. I just noticed one last question that rolled into my personal chat, but in case someone wants to drop off, feel free. But I hope some of the speakers have like 5 more minutes to spare. I hope that's all right. Is that fine? Perfect. Okay. So one of the questions that's also come up is when it comes to chocolate, do terms like bean to bar, fair trade, organic, etc., do they have a standard definition across the world? Are they really interpreted or practiced differently based on regional contexts?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the words organic, yes, there is sort of an international certification and a process involved in that. Same with fair trade, there is. With bean to bar, there isn't. It just sort of it's a pretty loose definition, but it means that the chocolate maker is buying the beans versus buying pre-made chocolate from a large Belgian company. So it means that they're making chocolate from the bean to the bar. But I think what the question you're asking is kind of how do you differentiate and how do you get past all of these terms? One, yes, you should read about them and learn more about them. You should talk to your chocolate makers or your food producers. But really, you're looking for a combination of all of these things, and you need to sort of look for all of these words together. So you need to have sort of single origin in there that helps you see that there's some kind of traceability and transparency in how they're procuring their raw ingredient. Bean to bar denotes a sort of process that's a little bit more minimal, a little bit more mindful. It doesn't necessarily need a lot of commercial ingredients or unnatural ingredients or emulsifiers, or it shows that the chocolate maker is confident in what they're doing, that they're making the actual chocolate and not having to use any sort of dairy or a chemical or preservative or emulsifier to cover it up. The words organic are also one of the ways to do it, because we find that this is sort of the most transparent, and it's the best way to really, really tell where your beans are coming from and what's happening all along the way. It might not be the same for every single ingredient, but it does work for chocolate in the Indian context. So you're looking for all of these words together, and then you've got sort of a good, something that you can kind of stand, something that has legs to stand on.
I mean, while there is all of this terminology surrounding organic and, fair trade and all of that, what you're really genuinely looking for is regenerative farming. What you're genuinely looking for is the farmer getting paid for the work that he's performing. What you're genuinely looking for is a sort of clear channel throughout, which is what ensures the actual supply chain to function at optimum length, which means that everybody from the bottom to the top is getting paid. It means that the product is of high quality purely because the farmer is incentivized to produce a good chocolate and produce a good crop. And so you're really ensuring it at every step of the way, which is what ensures, as I think what Mansi says, is that to make delicious chocolate, you have to have ethical beans. Mm-hmm. And I've been asked that question a lot. What does it even mean that you have to have ethical beans to have good tasty chocolate? What it means is that you must ensure that the farmer at the bottom, as well as the person who's conching your chocolate, as well as the person fermenting, roasting your chocolate, all of them must be incentivized, paid correctly to ensure that the perfect product is being launched by each of those guys. Mm-hmm. And so what you're really looking for is regenerative farming. What you're looking for is someone to actually put in the effort because they're incentivized to do it. These words just ensure that all that process happens. Yep. The organic and the bean to bar and the fair trade. All of these are certifications to ensure these processes.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that, like, as a, being part of being a conscious consumer is there is healthy and right, like, skepticism about some of these terms because they do get misused, not by, Mason and Co, but by other brands that like to greenwash. And I would say that my approach with this would be to when a brand is truly cares about regenerative farming, fair wages, as well as like the process and the artisanal processes involved in manufacture, they will talk about it, and they will, some basic research, some basic, like, as the consumer, it's on you to do that basic research. Nowadays it's probably a scroll through an Instagram account that will give you some of the answers you need. But if you notice that nobody is mentioning anything about the farmers, then perhaps bean to bar is just something they're saying. If you dig into it and you see that they've had this kind of conversation, that these kinds of things are being talked about by that brand, then they will be talking about them if they can be bothered to do them, because it isn't cheap and it isn't it is a time investment. So I would say that's the onus on the consumer, to not just say, well, how are we supposed to tell, because none of these certifications are standardized, but actually take on the role of the investigator themselves.
We can hope.
Yeah. There's no cheap food.
No.
Well, I think with that, we really have to stop, because there's so many interesting conversations to be had and so many interesting questions that come up, and we hope we've done justice to all of them. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining in the conversation. Thank you, especially Amrita, Mansi, and Sarah, for staying on and really giving us such interesting perspectives. Some of the people in the chat have called it a very eye-opening conversation around Indian cacao. So thank you very, very much for this and for joining in the meetup.
Organizing as well. Thank you guys. Elizabeth
Thank
and
you,
Anusha.
everybody. Thank you, Mansi.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Sarah.
Talk to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So
Bye.
we've dropped a lot of these links in the chat. Do feel free to follow some of these organizations that we've spoken about today. And we'll also be sending out an email with all the reading resources that you can use to educate yourself more about Indian cacao. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.